Part 1. My golden brother hired a pie to expose me. It backfired spectacularly. You know that feeling when your family just doesn't see you? Like no matter what you do, you're always the afterthought, the disappointment, the problem child who can't quite measure up? Yeah. That was me. For years. Let me set the scene. Small town kid, middle of 3 siblings. My older brother? Let's call him Golden Boy. Star athlete, charisma for days, married his high school sweetheart, 2 perfect kids who probably poop rainbows. My parents' pride and joy. And then there was me. The asthmatic bookworm who cried during Bambi. The one who graduated high school with a GPA barely higher than the temperature of a lukewarm coffee. The college dropout. You get the picture. My little sister? She was the baby, the princess. By the time I moved out, she was still a teenager, but even now as an adult with her own kids, she's got that I've never faced consequences energy. Sweet, but spoiled. And like everyone else in my family, she kind of just tolerated me. But here's where things get interesting. After I flamed out of college, I did what any self-respecting black sheep would do. I leaned hard into my nerdy side. Worked at a comic book store, made friends with the other misfits, and eventually, me and this guy I'll call Dave, because why not, started a little IT support business on the side. Just fixing people's printers, recovering lost files, that kind of thing. Except it wasn't just a side gig for long. Turns out, we were good at it. Fast forward a few years, and we sold the company to a bigger fish for enough money that, well, let's just say I don't have to work anymore. But I still do because, honestly, what else am I gonna do? Play golf? Please. Now, here's the kicker, nobody in my family knew. Why? Because every time I tried to talk about my job, my brother would cut me off with some "Oh, that's cute, but let me tell you about the luxury SUV I just sold." And my parents? They still thought I worked at that comic store, the one that closed 7 years ago. So I just stopped correcting them. Let them think I was barely scraping by in my dingy apartment, playing video games all day. It was easier than fighting for their approval. But then, my brother got suspicious. See, Golden Boy had this habit of checking in on me, which really meant snooping. Asking weirdly specific questions about my finances, my living situation, like he was waiting for me to admit I was drowning. And I guess he finally got tired of waiting because he hired a private investigator. Yeah. You heard that right. His genius plan? Dig up proof I was a failure so he could swoop in, play the hero, and, I don't know, maybe force me into some kind of intervention for being a 30-something loser. Except the pie didn't find a loser. He found a guy with a 7-figure net worth, a paid-off house, and a job title that wasn't retail employee. And when my brother got that report, oh, it was glorious. But that's just the start. Because what I did next, let's just say, I play dirty too. Part 2, I hired the same pie to investigate my brother. Here's what I found. So there I was, sitting in my home office, which my family still thinks is just a room with a bunch of nerdy posters, staring at the security alerts on my screen. Someone had been poking around my financial records, hard. Credit checks, property records, even old employment history. At first I thought it was some identity thief. Until I traced it back to a private investigator's firm. And then it hit me. My brother. Of course it was him. Golden Boy had always treated me like some charity case he needed to fix. But hiring a pie? That was next level. I could practically hear his smug voice, "Just looking out for you, little brother." Now, most people might have confronted him immediately. Not me. I'm the quiet one, remember? The one who sits back and observes. So I did something much more satisfying. I called the same pie firm. "I'd like to retain your services," I told them, voice calm. "For a background check. On my brother." The investigator hesitated. "That's unusual. Isn't it?" I said, sliding my credit card across the table. 2 weeks later, I had a folder thicker than my childhood trauma. And let me tell you, what was inside? Chef's kiss. Turns out, Mr. Perfect Car Salesman was living a life built on credit card fumes and wishful thinking. 3 mortgages on his McMansion. Back taxes owed to the IRS. 2 past DWIs that somehow never came up at family dinners. And my personal favorite? Multiple domestic disturbance calls to his neighborhood, all conveniently timed after his business dinners, which, according to the report, usually ended at a strip club called the Velvet Hammer. But here's the real kicker, his thriving dealership career? He'd been on probation for fudging sales numbers. That big promotion he bragged about last Thanksgiving? Pure fiction. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Armed with my new knowledge, I did what any self-respecting black sheep would do. I waited for Sunday dinner. Walking into my parents' house that night felt like stepping onto a stage. Everything was normal: mom's dry pot roast, dad's half-hearted questions about the weather, my brother holding court about his latest big sale. But this time, I had the ultimate trump card. "So," my brother said, smirking as he passed the mashed potatoes, "still working at that comic store?" I took a slow sip of water. "Actually, funny story about that." Then I dropped the bomb. Casually mentioned how interesting it was that someone had run a full background check on me recently. The way his fork froze midair? Priceless. Imagine my surprise, I continued, when they found out I sold my company years ago. Or that I own my place outright. Or that, what was the number again? Oh right, 7 figures in investments. My parents' heads swiveled to my brother like they were watching tennis. His face went from pale to purple in seconds. "But hey," I said, reaching for my bag, "since we're sharing. I had some questions about your finances, big bro." When I slid that folder across the table, you could have heard a pin drop. What happened next? Let's just say it involved my brother screaming that I'd ruined everything. My mom crying about what the neighbors will think. My dad quietly calculating how much he'd lent Golden Boy over the years. And me? For the first time in my life? I was the one in control. But this story's far from over. Because in part 3, we'll talk about the aftermath, the desperate texts, the sudden family emergencies, and why money changes everything. Even when you wish it wouldn't. Part 3, when they realized I was rich, the family drama went nuclear. You ever notice how money doesn't just change you, it changes how everyone else treats you? Overnight, I went from being the family disappointment to, well, let's call it what it was, the family ATM. The text started immediately after that dinner. First, my mom, "Sweetie, your father and I were thinking. Maybe we should update our will. You know, since you're so good with financial things now." Then my sister, "Hey, my middle kid really needs braces. Not asking for help, just, you know, if you wanted to." But the best one? My brother. 3 days of radio silence, then, out of nowhere, "We need to talk. Family emergency." Turns out, the emergency was that his powerboat payments were overdue. I wish I was joking. What followed was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. My parents, who'd spent years barely remembering my birthday, suddenly wanted weekly lunches. My sister accidentally sent me a link to a GoFundMe for her kid's private school. And my brother? He actually showed up at my door, unannounced, to apologize. "Look," he said, pacing my living room, "I was just worried about you. You seemed lost. But now that I know you're doing well." He trailed off, eyeing my TV like he was calculating its resale value. "Maybe you could help me out? Just a loan. The dealership's cutting back hours." I almost laughed. Almost. Because here's the thing, I could have helped. If he'd ever treated me like a human being instead of a charity case? Maybe. But the second they smelled money, the mask slipped. The sick niece that never was. Then came the nuclear option. At the next family dinner, yes, I went, I'm a glutton for punishment, my mom hit me with this gem over dessert, "It's just so sad about little Emily. All those medical bills." I froze. "Who? Your niece? Emily?" My sister jumped in, eyes wide. "She's been so sick. We didn't want to worry you, but here's the problem, I have no niece named Emily." I stared at them. "You mean your dog? Because you named your dog Emily." Cue the most awkward silence of my life. That's when I lost it. Not yelling, I don't yell. But cold, quiet fury? "Oh yeah. Let me get this straight," I said, wiping my mouth. "For 30 years, I was the family screw-up. Now that you think I've got money, suddenly there's emergencies. There's sick kids that don't exist. There's..." I looked at my brother. "How much do you owe the IRS again?" My dad stood up. "That's enough." "You're right," I said, grabbing my keys. "It is. That was 6 months ago. I still see them, but on my terms. Short visits. Public places. No more Sunday dinners." The craziest part? Once they realized I wouldn't be funding their lifestyles, the quality time dried up fast. My brother hasn't spoken to me since I refused to co-sign his new truck. My parents remember my birthday again, but only if I remind them first. And the pie reports? Oh, I keep getting updates. Just in case. Part 4, why cutting them off was the best decision I ever made. You know that moment when you finally exhale after holding your breath for years? That's what this past year has felt like. After the sick niece fiasco, something in me just broke. But not in the way you'd think. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was relief. Like I'd been waiting 3 decades for permission to stop begging for scraps of their approval, and I'd finally given it to myself. My therapist, let's call her Dr. Chen, had a field day with all this. What if, she said in one session, their opinion of you wasn't about you at all? Turns out, I wasn't the family screw-up. I was just the family mirror, the one who reflected back everything they hated about themselves. My brother's insecurity? My parents' failed dreams? My sister's fear of being ordinary? None of it was mine to carry. Mind blown. Remember my sister's middle kid? The one I said was like me? Well, she started texting me after everything blew up. Just little things at first, memes about anxiety, TikToks of awkward family gatherings. Then one day, Aunt/Uncle, did you really make $1 million from video games? Turns out, my sister had been telling her kids I was some kind of computer hacker. Close enough, now this 12-year-old sees me as the cool relative who escaped. We play Minecraft together sometimes. I'm teaching her to code. It's nice. Then there's Ava. We met at a cybersecurity conference. She was giving a talk on ethical hacking. I was pretending to understand half of it. When I mumbled something about firewalls, she laughed and said, "Wow, that's the nerdiest pickup line I've ever heard." Here's the kicker, when I told her about my family, she didn't pity me. She didn't rush to fix me. She just nodded and said, "So when do I get to meet this train wreck in person? I'll bring popcorn." I did go back one final time. My mom's 60th birthday. Walked in with Ava wearing my old Comic-Con shirt, the one with the stretched out collar. The tension was palpable. My brother ignored me. My dad made stiff small talk about the weather. But my mom? She pulled me aside and said the quiet part out loud. "We didn't know how to love you the way you needed." No apology. No grand reconciliation. Just the truth, finally spoken. And weirdly, that was enough. Money, locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Trust fund set up for my niece/nephew, accessible only for education. Family, distant but civil. I send Christmas cards. They don't. Me, happier. Lighter. Still in therapy. Still driving that old Saturn, now with a bumper sticker that says "Ask me about my emotional damage." The real twist ending? My brother got fired last month. Guess who called me for a job reference? I said no. But I did forward him some coding tutorials. Old habits die hard. If you're the family screw-up, the black sheep, the disappointment, hear this. You were never the problem. The right people will love you for your quirks, not in